Hello, welcome everyone to a new Deltares webinar, very special edition this time, since very recently DELWAQ has become open source following many other modules within the Del3D modeling suite. And to facilitate you in using or start using DELWAQ, we have scheduled two webinars. First webinar is this month. Next webinar will be in April, so next month. But of course we'll start with the webinar today, and the webinar of today will mainly discuss let's say the open source code compiling and just start modeling in a Windows environment. The webinar of next month will discuss some applications of DELWAQ, but of course we'll start with the webinar of today. The first series, webinar in the series of these DELWAQ webinars. Please keep in mind that during the webinar you can ask textual questions. We have a panel of experts available in the room. So if you have any questions during the webinar, ask them textual. After the webinar, there might be some time left to ask oral questions as well. So stay tuned. For now, I would like to invite Michel Jeuken from Deltares to start the webinar presentation. Michel, good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I start here my presentation on the water quality modeling with DELWAQ. DELWAQ went open source last week, finally, and I'm going to introduce you into how you can start getting DELWAQ, compiling it and running it. So an overview, I'll have a quick walkthrough to getting and compiling Del3D, which includes DELWAQ now, a short tour through the source code of DELWAQ, and some common errors when you try to run DELWAQ in debug mode if you want to make modifications and start searching in the code. And finally, performing a water quality calculation using the graphical user interface you can obtain through Deltares. And hopefully there's some time left for questions and answers. That's me, that's Michel Jeuken. I'm the presenter. Roderick is organizing this currently. And the cooperators in this room here are Jan van Beek and Adrie Maurits. And yeah, as Roderick said, you can use some functions from the interface to run it. If you want to follow this webinar, we assume that you know something about downloading, what is source code, what is compiling, what are binaries, the result of your compiling, and how you could run a simulation normally. And well, if you're interested in DELWAQ, it is good to know something about water quality modeling, and you have to know a bit about subversion. That's the management of versions of the source code that we use. Oh, okay. I'll hold on a second. There's a small problem. Oh, it's. Oh, you can't see the slides. Okay. Yeah, it seems to be on hold. Okay. Okay, my desktop was on hold, so you couldn't see the slides I showed. So I'll go back a little. So this is what I told about the overview of the webinar. A quick walkthrough, a short through the code of DELWAQ, common errors when you try to debug it, performing the water quality calculations using Del3D GUI, and some questions and answers. This is us. And as I told, some general knowledge is assumed when you want to follow this webinar. So if you're interested in this, I guess you know a little about the things we mentioned here. If you want to know in more detail about compiling and running Delft3D, I would refer to the January and February last year webinars on compiling on Linux and Windows. And this webinar will focus on compiling and running the DELWAQ part, which was introduced in it this year, and mainly on the Windows. We're glad to say that the DELWAQ also compiles and runs on Linux, and we tested it both on the Intel Fortran compiler and the GNU Fortran compiler. We use Red Hat Enterprise as a Linux distribution, but hopefully it will work on other distributions as well. So what is DELWAQ D water quality modeling? It's the modeling of the substances you can have in the water. Usually models have a tight set of processes they simulate, but one of the key features of the DELWAQ model is that you have a library of substances and processes you can choose from. So you can do a very selective modeling of what you need to make the model lighter when necessary. You can extend it with other substances and processes. There are also several numerical schemes for different requirements depending on the situation you're working with at that moment. There are also tools for grid accuracy of the flow grid, both 2D and 3D, and there are couplings to various hydraulic models to obtain a flow of the water itself. Also, there's a lot of output options, mass balance options, and statistical outputs. What do you get when you obtain the open source? You'll get a DELWAQ 1 executable and library, which does mainly the pre-processing of the input. And you'll get a source code to the DELWAQ 2 exa and library, which does the actual computation of the water quality. And this includes the full process library. Where are DELWAQ 1 and 2 used in the process of your modeling? I don't know if you can see the mouse, but on the right side you see the water quality library from which you select the processes and substances you want using the so-called PLCT. The next webinar will focus more on what you can do with the PLCT. You can use that to create a water quality model together with other user input, for example, obtained through graphical user interface. You can get the other model inputs such as initial conditions, boundary conditions, and loads to the surface water from substances. And that, together with a hydronic simulation result, will be a set of input files for DELWAQ 1. And instead of using the graphical user interface, you can also manipulate these files yourself, and it can be handy to produce them first using the graphical user interface and then afterwards do the modifications you want. Then DELWAQ 1 works on these input files and produces work files which are used by DELWAQ 2 for the actual calculation, and DELWAQ 2 uses the actual routines for the processes that you selected in the water quality library, and that will result in simulation output. And with post-processing tools you can get the results from your model and eventually hopefully good advice on water quality and what people should do to improve it. What do you need if you want to build DELWAQ yourself? You need a Tortoise SVN or another program to get access to the repository to obtain the source code and to get updates to it. Then in Windows, it's best to work with Visual Studio. We don't have an auto compiler yet currently to compile it on Windows. And we use the Intel Fortran 11 or higher compiler. And what we think is a handy tool is Total Commander. That's a nice alternative for the Windows Explorer, and it's a very crafty tool to manipulate your files. And if you want to do a DELWAQ calculation, you also need another model to produce your hydraulic input. Currently we have couplings with the Delft 3D model. There's also a coupling with the DELWAQ model, which is not open source yet, but I heard plans in the future. And there's the DELWAQ model, which is open source as well, and it's coupled to that as well. Okay, if you have Tortoise SVN and your compiler ready, you can download the source code. First you need to register on www.oss.rs.nl to get access to the repository. It's always best to start with a tagged version of the code, since in the trunk version sometimes new developments are being committed and not entirely tested, so possibly not stable, and that's also currently not the case for the flow part. I will come to that later. So it's best to start with a tagged version. And we were working very hard on DELWAQ to get it really stable, also on all platforms, and that means that today the latest version has been committed and tagged that is stable on Windows and Linux, on both the Intel compiler and the GNU compiler and Linux. But unfortunately that means that the flow code that is included with it is not stable and didn't pass the test bench. So we have a temporary tagged version, and hopefully soon we'll have a complete tagged version which includes DELWAQ as well. So to get the source code, you need this address, and I can show you hands-on how you would do that. Just copy the address. Then I go to the Total Commander tool. I see I'm switched now. If you have installed Tortoise SVN, you'll get a nice menu underneath your alternate mouse button, and you do an SVN checkout. Well, the address is already there because, of course, I tested this. Then you select a web location for your results, Delft. And then you can see, hopefully, there's the window. That Tortoise is downloading the source code. Well, I leave this a bit on the background. Okay, there it is. Now we say OK. And as you can see, now we have a complete and unchanged version of the source code. If you go into the source directory, the src directory, you will find a solution for Visual Studio 2010. is loading now. Here you can see all the current engines that are open source. Delft3D, Wave, and WAC is here now as well. So after you opened the solution and you change to the release version with Ctrl-Shift-B, you can start building all the models from the code you just obtained. Well, while this is building, I'll go back to the presentation. So we opened the solution, and with Ctrl-Shift-B you can start the compilation. There are install scripts run after you are building the release, which copy all the executables and DLLs you need into the bin32 directory. And here I use my code for the location where you just downloaded the open source code. If you are debugging, then the executables will be placed somewhere a bit more closer to the code they were built from. And for DELWAQ, this will be in the source engines GPL, WAC, bin, debug, and it will place the DLLs you need during debugging with it as well to facilitate your debugging activities. So I started the compiling already. I think it's still running in the background. It takes some time to build all the engines. So I talk a bit about how you can get into this DELWAQ code. So I don't know if my mouse pointer can be seen. No. Does this work a bit? Yeah. Okay, so the main programs are marked here. DELWAQ 1 and DELWAQ 2. Currently those are very tiny executables that actually run the libraries, the DELWAQ 1 library and the DELWAQ 2 library. And those access the actual code, which can be found in the project below, the data, IO, kernel, and utils projects. So this is the main entrance to the code. There are also some test programs to test the library access of the DELWAQ code. So what does DELWAQ 1 do? Well, the input file consists of about 9 or 10 sections, and the DELWAQ 00 Fortran code just goes through the subroutines to read all the sections of this input file. And it's very important to know that if there happens anything during your calculation and it fails, usually there is some message which can be found in the LST output file or the LSP output file, so you can get some clue about what could be wrong with your input if there's anything wrong. The DELWAQ 2 program starts from DELWAQ 2.f. It starts with an initiation, and after that it switches to one of the integration routines, and there's a whole list of them. And from each of these integration routines, all the subroutines that do all the things you need during the calculation, such as getting boundary condition data and flow data from all other subroutines. So this is just some basic entry points into the source code, so how it's built up. Now let's see if it's still compiling. Well, this takes quite some time, but I have an alternative prepared because I prepared this webinar. You can see here an already built version. So if you manage to build your source code, you will see that a bin directory pops up. In this bin directory is a Win32 directory, and here you can see directories for all the engines, including WAC. And within the WAC directory, in the bin directory, you see all the executables and DLLs you need. So if we go up a few directories, you will see that there's also an examples directory, which is a very basic test to see whether your binary works or not. And the sixth directory will test the DELWAQ run. There's a small batch file which will show if it works. Well, unfortunately, it does. The DELWAQ 1 part, and then you can start the DELWAQ 2 part, and as you can see, this creates model output for a very simple application. So this is the first test within Windows, where you can see whether you have successfully built the DELWAQ model. It's not a full test bench of all the options of DELWAQ, so it's not a guarantee. We also made versions for Linux, SH script. Oh, and here's the other compiler. It's finished. Okay, so that was the release version. Let me see my presentation. So this is a small test to run your model. Then of course, when you start developing the model, or when you run into some error and you want to find out where in the model exactly it fails, you'll have to get the right arguments into the debugger, and your development studio. And it's very important that you, besides giving the project file you want to start, you also give the location of your process directory, your process definition. So first we have to build a debug version, and when you only want to build your DELWAQ projects, you just go to the folder WAC and you build here. So that will make building a bit faster. Then what is important when you start debugging is that you set the right project to start. And unfortunately I can't do that when I'm compiling the code. Well, this also takes some more time, so I'll switch to the pre-compiled version I prepared before starting the webinar. So as I said, don't forget to set which project should be started when you start debugging. You have to switch to the debug version, and you have to set the right properties in the debug window. First you have to select a working directory. As a working directory I will now use the example that run. I'll copy the path from Total Commander. And I'll paste it here as the working directory. As command line arguments, well, they're described in the manuals extensively, but here we need to find the input file, which is the IMP file. I'll copy the name from here. And as I said, for DELWAQ 1, you need to define the location of your process definition with -p, and the process definition can be found in your bin directory, Windows 32, bug, defaults. And you have to give the full path and the name of the file itself. In Total Commander you can easily in Mark copy the names with path to your clipboard. And you have to use quotes if there's a space in it. I don't know if there's one in it now, but okay. Now we have set the right arguments. Then we go to the source code. And we set a breakpoint. And we press the play button, so hopefully debugging will start now for DELWAQ 1. I built the projects already, so they shouldn't be out of date. And as you can see now, here we are in the source code, in the routine that gets the arguments from the running prompt. And as you can see, this is the executable. I started webinar prepared build 2360 DELWAQ 1, and it uses the example, and this is the process definition that has been used. So this is how you start debugging DELWAQ 1. I'll stop the debugging now. Actually, debugging errors is of course a lot more complicated, and I'll show the same for DELWAQ 2. Here you only have to define the input file, and right working directory. Oh, that's the wrong one. Working directory here. And the name of the input file. Right here. Okay. And now in DELWAQ 2 we can also set a breakpoint. Oops. It seems to be missing a library. I thought I pre-built this, but okay, I guess it missed some of the libraries it needed. So I fixed it, copying the DLLs from the install, the DLL libraries that were used, and I copy them into the debug version, and hopefully this works better. Okay, so there's still a small error in the debug script in obtaining the correct DLLs that support the DELWAQ to run. But this is generally how you can start debugging the DELWAQ 1 and 2. It's also possible to use a graphical user interface. This can be obtained from .rs as well. You have to visit the OSS website and send an email from which you will receive a download link. Currently there's not a complete install, but a zip file available which contains the files you need. You have to unzip that to the directory you want. This is where your installation of MyDelft3 will be. You have to start a little script and then you have to copy the binaries you created from the Delft3 source into your graphical user interface installation to actually run the models. And I'll try to show that as well. So I downloaded this zip file. This contains the Delft3D folder, and within it is the full installation of the Delft3D graphical user interface. So now I create a new directory from the name of the zip file, create a new folder, with Totamano you can go into the zip file and you can select all this and copy all these files into the directory I just created. Okay. Now I have to look up my binaries. In the webinar directory there's a bin directory which contains the Win32 directory I shown before. There is one with some extra not open source binaries in the directory already, and you have to copy this Win32 directory you created yourself over the bin directory in the installment, and you have to overwrite all the files. It was a bit quick, but I said overwrite all existing binaries. Don't forget to run the substitute script. It sets some files settings to the location where you installed the Delft3 GUI yourself. It's a very small batch file. And you can start the Delft3 GUI using the D3D menu batch file. Well, within it you get a small menu in which you can see flow and wave, also grip tools and some other utilities. We'll go into the water quality. In this menu is the general coupling with the Delft 3D flow output. And in the manual, the general user manual, you can see the tutorial, which shows you how you can couple with Delft 3D. You can start here. I'll walk a bit through this one of the examples that is included. And I remember now that you first have to select your working directory. So first I'll show you that in the installation you just did, there's a tutorial directory, and within that, if you sort by name, you can see the DELWAQ directory, and there's the version title inlet. That's one of the examples used a lot in Delft 3D. So this is the directory we're going to use as a working directory. I'll copy that path. And here I can go to webinar. This is the installation I just made, tutorial, DELWAQ, and here's the version title inlet. So now I'm working on that directory. I can define the input, which is saved in the so-called hit file of the version title inlet. Well, here are some information about it. And as you can see here, there's the grouping. The hydraulic model has 10 layers, and they are combined into 2 by 2 into 5 layers for water quality. If you have defined the input, you can start the coupling. Select the file. And this will start the actual coupling. Then you return. If you go to processes, you can make a selection of the process you actually want. As I said before, Jos van Gils will talk more about that in the next webinar. There are also some predefined sets you can use. I now go to the input. This is the full input menu. I'll load the example from the tutorial, version title inlet tutorial. It's created with an older version. So here you can put the description. In here you can see the hit file, which I showed before is selected. And here are some options for the dispersion and the method you use for that. In substances, you can see that we selected a substance file which contained the E. coli bacteria salinity and inorganic matter. And here are the output parameters which are put out, and the processes that are currently active. On the time frame, as you can see here, is that there's a coupled hydraulic model has only a very short period, a little more than 24 hours. That's a period that can be reused in the quality calculation. You have to define initial conditions. This can be fixed values for your whole schematization, or you can give a grid of initial conditions. You can define binary conditions. You can change the parameters of your processes. In numerical options, you generally select the integration algorithm you want to use. Then you define the discharges, which adds extra substances to your system or extracted from it. And you select some special interest observation points and how much output you want. So this is where you define the input, and then you start the actual model by these two buttons. I have to select the file, open this, and this starts the actual computation of the tutorial example. First part, and then the real calculation after the pre-processing. And as you can see, it used in the webinar directory the installment I just made, and uses the binary I just created using the open source software. Well, after that you can view your results using QuickPlot or other tools, but I won't go into that at the moment. So that's how you run DELWAQ. So you can run it from the GUI or from a command prompt, and there are various other ways. You can also start it through the DLL version. And if you have any problems, please look into the LST and LSP files or for DELWAQ 1 or the monitoring file for DELWAQ 2, and hopefully it will provide you information on what went wrong during a calculation. So that is about how far I can get. I can give you some directions on where you can start from here. With the installation you could obtain from .irs, there's also a lot of user manuals, especially on DELWAQ, and you can also find them on the website. A good start is the general user manual on the water quality. And especially Chapter 7, the tutorial walks you through the graphical user interface to do an actual calculation, as I've briefly shown to you. If you want to know what processes are available on DELWAQ, please go to the Processes Technical Reference Manual. It shows in detail what processes are included and how they are included, and the science behind it. It's possible to edit the WAQ input file yourself. Well, there's a full description of this input file in a dedicated manual, and it's also possible to define your own processes, and therefore I would refer to the Open Processor Library user manual. So besides the very full library of processes you already have, it's also possible to define processes yourself and add them to the DELWAQ system and run your own processes. Well, all these manuals can be found in your installation in the manuals directory. End to end, I have some general questions and answers about Delft3 open source. Is it possible to get pre-built and tested executables? Well, that is possible through service packages, and you can find more information on it on the site. If you want help on compiling, well, just try to get some help on the webinar and the fora and the frequently asked questions, and hopefully they will help you a bit further. And for help on modeling, we also have several training courses, and also you can put questions on the forum or get service packages from DELWAQ. Is it possible to contribute your own source code? Well, if you have bug fixes or minor improvements, you can post them on the forum, and we'll monitor the forum for information posted there. And if you want to get your own working brand, you should contact the OSS webmaster for the email address mentioned there. Well, this webinar, after it's finished, can be watched back on the website, as all previous webinars, of course. And last but not least, the next webinar will be by Jos van Geels within a month, and it will go into more detail in what you can do with DELWAQ and the process library. So far for my presentation. I see my colleagues are typing a lot, trying to answer questions. And I don't know if we have some time left for any other questions, which maybe I can answer.
Yes, there is time left for questions. So thank you, Michel, first of all, for this presentation. Very interesting. Well, I guess that there are still some questions left. The panel has been answering questions quite a lot during the presentation. So thank you for posting them. But there is some time left to ask oral questions, if you have any. So if you want to ask an oral question, please raise your hand digitally. And then we can see that you have a question and allow you to speak. So who wants to ask a question? Please raise your hand. I see some hands over there. First one is from Ying Liu. Ying, you have a question?
Yeah. I want to know if I can run this open source code. Do I need a license?
As I understood the question, do you need a license to run the open source code? Yeah. No, you don't need a license anymore to run the open source code, so it should run without any license checks. I'm not quite sure about the graphical user interface, but if you have any problems with that, please send an email and we'll try to fix that. It should work without a license or without a paid license as well, the graphical user interface to the open source binaries. So thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us your email?
I'm sorry?
Can you give us your email? I can't see your email.
We'll send the contact details to you after the webinar. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ying.
Yeah.
All right. I see that there's another question from Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, welcome.
Hello, this is all. First of all, I would like to thank you for this nice presentation.
Thank you for attending.
This is what we have from Delphi Hydraulics. I was a former student in Delphi since 1995. I got my master with Professor Van Rijn. My question is, can I use Visual Studio with 2008? Because I tried before and I had some bugs and I could not compile the former version. The second question is, I noticed that pre and post processing needs license for 1 year.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your question and thank you for your interest in this webinar and the Delphi 3D software. For compiling on the Visual Studio 2008, we should support that. We always check it. I don't have Visual Studio 2008 myself, so I look at Adri. It's on the to-do list to fix it. There are some issues with the 2008 solutions, but we try to fix that as soon as possible. So
instead Intel Fortran should be included in the Visual Studio as well to make this compiling?
Oh yeah, of course that's you need a Fortran compiler, and it's not standardly included with Visual Studio. So you need Visual Studio and an Intel compiler as well. So
I should have both on the computer.
Yeah, you should have both on the computer, and for Intel you need at least version 11. And
11?
11. I think the latest version is version 13. But well, since we have a very nice ICT
Intel Fortran 11 can work with Visual Studio 2008.
I'm not sure. Version 11 of Fortran works with Visual Studio 2008, I think. Yeah. And version 12 of Intel?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Yeah. So it's a bit difficult to have the right combination, but yeah.
Okay, I will try. I will try this. This. And if I have a problem, I will send it in the forum.
Yeah. Maybe we can help you there.
Okay. The other question about pre and post processing. I noticed that it needs license for 1 year.
Yeah, I don't know much about the licensing in the GUI, but we have a GUI available without cost, but it can be, and I'm not sure, there's a license file that will come with it, but if the license expires, you can get a new license by sending an email to our service desk.
Free of charge?
Yeah, I think that the GUI to the open source will remain free of charge, and I don't know if there are plans to make that open source as well in the far future. Maybe not the user interface, but more tools will become available open source in the near future. So, a flexible mesh, that's a hydraulic model that will become available next. So it's one of the next open source tools. Engines that will be available, and we are also working on the tools to make them available.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. So are there any other questions? In the meantime, I'll show you the Delft3D open source website. So here you can see the Delft3D open source website, and we have set up a dedicated web page for DELWAQ. So if you go to forum and then to coast and estuary, it takes some time to load. But after some time you see this page, and then there's a link over here. So there's a subgroup which is called DELWAQ, and on this subgroup there is some information available on the modeling package, and there's also a forum down here. So we would like to receive your feedback and your suggestions on, for instance, this webinar, but also about the DELWAQ modeling in general. So if you have questions after the webinar, please use this platform to post them. But there's still some time left to ask questions to the panel and to the presenter. So if there are any more questions, let me see. So still time to raise your hand if you have a question. Well, I don't see any more hands. Okay. Well, if you have any questions after the webinar session, please visit the website as I just showed. For now, I would like to thank, first of all, Michel for this presentation, of course. Thank you very much. And of course, also the panel. Jan van Beek and Adrie Maurits for well, answering all your questions. Again, I would like to remind you this is the first webinar of two DELWAQ webinars. So next month we do have another webinar about DELWAQ. Please subscribe if you're interested to follow this one on the website. I'm sure you will be able to find the web page. So for now, thank you for attending and hope to see you next month. Thank you. Bye bye.